Welcome to those of you who are tuning in on YouTube. Thanks for being with us in that way. And also, what a privilege and pleasure it is to welcome you on this Mother's Day in 2024 to the Caron Chapel service in person, in vivo. And also a shout out to anybody who might be watching on live stream or on campus. The topic for today, which I think is a lovely alignment with the festival of Mother's Day, is servanthood. And all these topics for the Caron Chapel service come up. I think my current count is 19, so every 19th week I'm returning to a subject area, but because of that being, I don't think divisible with 52, it ends up moving around the course of the year. And I'm always amused by it. The other thing is because it's a repetition of subject matter, I recall parts of things I've used to address a subject area in the past. And there's so many ways in which servanthood has bearing both on my training as a theologian, practical in ministry, and on the journey of addiction recovery that, as I often mention lately, my problem is to prune rather than to figure out what to say from a lack of material. And so quickly to sort of categorize that, like the 12 steps culminate in the 12th step, invitation to give away what we've experienced, and servanthood is an essential component of the vision of recovery experience in the 12-step frame. And I think it's fair to say that that bleeds over into other sort of recovery movements and traditions that we have available for our clients today, like Recovery Dharma and even Smart Recovery, because I think that at a deeper level, this is a segue, servanthood is a thing that's inherent in the character of the human person as character develops in the human person. And people who are not oriented towards the giving of oneself for another are missing out on one of the very, very deep truths that's been affirmed in behavioral health and in wisdom traditions throughout the ages, which is that a path to happiness is not found through accumulation. It's not found through like the wielding of power, personal power, but in fact, and there's good studies to support this, the experience of joy and happiness and meaning and fulfillment in life is best sought through connectedness. And it's in our connections to other people. This is why you can go to places of extraordinary suffering and find weird instances of people with peace and contentment and joy. And I've had that experience in missionary trips that I was privileged to take in my church years. And I think you can find it here, and you certainly find it in the meeting communities of recovery mutual support, is people struggling, but celebrating the shared struggle together. And so as we grow and mature as human beings, I want to argue that we learn that service is a path to fulfillment and to flourishing, and selfishness and the personal accumulation and hoarding and scarcity is not that. I was intrigued as I was looking at philosophical and wisdom tradition support for this argument that Adam Smith, I'm off my outline, but oh well, Adam Smith, who's very famous in economic studies for the invisible hand of market movement and all this sort of stuff, is also a person who's credited with a significant amount of address to what becomes a term in contemporary social philosophical circles of it's called enlightened self-interest. And enlightened self-interest sounds like self-interest, right? But enlightened self-interest is when people have the awareness that it's in their own interest to be of service to others. So, and unenlightened self-interest is me, mine. But in fact, when we orient ourselves towards other people, one of the ways I like to think of myself as trained, and I bring it to this space weekly, is a ton of exploration of theological and spiritual traditions. When I first got into my abstinence from mind and mood altering chemicals, I identified as an atheist, and I was encouraged by the 12-step movement to find spirituality and a power greater than myself. And my initial response to that was recoil, because I don't know, there was a wound there. And but then I became incredibly curious. So I've done a lot of training and study, and I know a lot about a variety of different traditions. I'm deeply trained in the Christian tradition, but anyway, one of the things I do sometimes in preparing for a message is I try to figure out if I can bring in the other wisdom traditions that are, visibly celebrated at the table and on my stole. Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Taoism. These we all know the words, but we don't necessarily have great conversant knowledge of these things. And I've been taught in philosophy and theology class that the emphasis on servanthood that you find in the Christian tradition is not only a Christian emphasis, that it's more global. And in fact, if you want to know quickly where to pull from that, like the golden rule is a thing that you find across a variety of wisdom traditions and also in philosophical traditions. And a thing that's close to that is Immanuel Kant's categorical imperative. So philosophy and theology are not in tension with the 12 steps emphasis on servanthood as a part of what is kind of a path for us. And so I was thinking, like, how do I go there? And some of you have listened to me before know I get like really deep in the academic stuff, and then I have to pull myself back. But I started doing this thing, I'll confess. I started like testing the ChatGPT channel to see what happens when I ask GPT these questions. And actually, the young adult group that I do, we sometimes pull it right out and we like ask it deep, deep. It's so interesting. It's such an interesting tool. So this week, I was like, hey, ChatGPT, like if I was going to talk about wisdom traditions and the call to service, well, what would be the insights or sources? And it was annoying as crap, because in a half a second, it pulled out references that I would never have known in Islam and Buddhism, and it just like is like, oh well, so much for all of my study. They're completely outdone by this app. But I have an up on ChatGPT. And my up on ChatGPT involves the women in my life who I know as mothers, and the way in which they incarnate servanthood, which is a thing ChatGPT could tell me about. I could ask ChatGPT and it would tell me about attachment theory or, whatever. But ChatGPT has no frickin' idea about what I see in my wife when people come close to threatening her protectees. It is primal, and it is wild and awesome, and I ignore it at my own peril. And my mom birthed 5 children, suffered 3 miscarriages, and my mom too. Early in my recovery, my parents were my punching bag in a certain sense. I was really quick to find fault with my developmental experience, and I'm not saying there weren't wounds suffered by me and others in my family system, and a lack of awareness in certain areas, including around drugs and alcohol, but also around mental health. And oh, would I want to know what might have happened in our journey as a family had the insights that I get to have today been ones that my parents had 50 years ago. But it's taken me a long time. I was thinking about this week, and I was thinking, I have just been graced with an opportunity or an ability now to see my mother in a totally different way. I can cherish because I think my mom had a similar bone to my wife, that mother bone. I think, and I know it's not anatomically that, but you know what I'm saying. And that's the kind of mistake that ChatGPT would make, is if I use that term, it might not catch the metaphor. And one of the most poignant and difficult things about motherhood and service is the letting go piece. I have 2 sons in my life and 2 granddaughters, and they came to my life through my second marriage. So they're not my biological or adopted children, but they are mine in my life because these 2 boys have generously allowed me to occupy a dad chair. And I'm gonna have to be careful not to weep today, but what I watched in coming into my wife's life at that stage when her kids were already 20-something is that she had to release them when what she sees when they walk in the door is also the infant that she cradled. What she sees when they call on the phone and hears when they call on the phone is also the 5-year-old who is going off to, kindergarten. What she feels when they have a injury is the boo-boo that she kissed, right? And in a similar way, when I'm in a frickin' tantrum, I can manifest the 14-year-old, and he's still in me, right? And so this peculiar and beautiful thing that happens as human beings age is that we retain something of our past in us. And we can go back and to some degree access it, although it gets very colored, and it turns out our memory of who we are and what we were is some, pastiche of what we want and what we exaggerate and what actually happened, right? So we don't have crystal clear recall, but there's still the child in me, and my wife, and I'm sure my mom, got to the point where it's like the typical term they use is fledging, right? Or to flip it on the young person's failure to launch, right? And that's become a part of our vernacular. Thank you, Matthew McConaughey. But and I don't think that the movie that was a term that the movie title uses. But what I want to do is talk about a movement, and then I can connect it to recovery, because the movement of over the course of these, now we're being told it's more 25 years than 18 years, is the movement from extreme parental responsibility for every need to be cared for, to the point in which the triumph is the ability of the child, now adult, to care for themselves, and then the fulfillment of them in a repetition scenario where they become caregivers to a future generation, right? And we had family celebration of Mother's Day last night. The 2 boys were there, the daughter-in-law, the future daughter-in-law, we're counting on, Kayla, if you listen, and the 2 granddaughters. And so I could see it all. And in fact, I knew my wife's mom, my mom died in 1994, a long time ago. But my wife's mom became a surrogate mom for me. And she had died only 2 years ago. So if Marge was still here, we would have great-grandparent, grandparent, parent, and the current generation of children. And it's this movement from extreme oversight and nurturance of an infant that cannot take care of itself. It's funny because, some species like turtles birth turtles that can just wander off and don't need that. But we, because of the size of the birth canal, birth infants that are totally not fully baked. And in fact, it's like 25 years of further incubation in the nest of the family that take it before the full adulthood begins to manifest. And then thank God we've learned now that neuroplasticity attends so that even an old dude like me can still learn, right? So we continue to learn and grow, but that developmental cycle that is so acute that it requires intense parental sort of involvement is really important in a variety of ways. I'm lecturing, I don't mean to be. I want to get back to the heart of this thing, which is a mom's care, and that her job becomes releasing the care and letting the child flourish, and the child figuring out that his or her job is to care, right? It's this incredible, like, whoa, 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 that can be crazy making. And it's a beautiful thing when you see a mom that will actually let go. And we none of you have ever done this, of like maintaining too much control when your kids get, like to a certain age. You don't have any difficulty with the empty nesting, right? It can be really, really hard to navigate that transition. So let me jump into the recovery world, because one of my current mentors, a really interesting fellow, has called to my attention that there's a similar movement in addiction treatment. When people get here, they require very intense levels of assistance. Over there in the admission, like they may be drooling and shaking, having seizures, all kinds of like stuff. They are not okay. Like, and the nurse has to bring them, here's your liquid, here's your Librium, here's your taper, like whatever. And they're re-infantilized to a certain extent. They become like the very dependent and needy individual. And their humanity is quite diminished because of that. I mean, they may be people with, advanced degrees or extraordinary business ventures or all kinds of like worlds, but they come here to us and they're stripped of that, stripped of dignity and stripped of a certain sense of personal authority and responsibility. And our job as an organization is to foster what becomes this really accelerated movement back to individuation and functioning. It's one of the things that's so exciting about working here is that week by week, it's like what happens decade by decade in the human person. It's like a really wild thing. And the good news for you, if you're coming out of the fog, by the way, if you just came over from detox, is that it gets better quickly here if you just let us help you. And it's sort of like let us mother you, right? Like there's a piece of that. There's a something about that. And if we neglect to hold that, I hate when people use this word, it's like energy, then we're missing a piece of what is, I think, one of the most powerful things. I was taught when I first came to work here that one of the things that distinguished Caron was its lovingness, and that other treatment centers didn't have it in as strong of a capacity as is here. And I believe that, and I believe that's essential to the really great outcomes that are measured here against other providers, is that we somehow, the founders who are buried right over there, Dick and Kathleen Caron, instilled in this place of virtue and a value of being loving to the people who came here. And nurturing. And then it's like, and I talked about in my announcements, the 28-day cliff, right? We get to the point where we're like, okay, we're going to let you go to the next step. And it's turned out much like it's happened in our world today that like kids still live at home for a while, right? And one of the musicians that were here today just said this morning as we were getting ready, this going up the hill. So this staggering of levels of care is a reduction in the level of clinical management and an increase in the degree of self-management that gets us to the point where Evan, wherever he is going to celebrate a huge amount of time. But came back to Magic Mountain. He's like visiting for Mother's Day. Hey, right? It's awesome. This is not an inappropriate alignment of one of the foundational things of what it is to be human. And one of the things that happens this year, because you get your humanity back. And addiction robs people of it, robs families of their whole functioning, and hijacks the conversation, the agenda, onto its own page, which could make you so angry, justifiably. It's a horrible manifestation of ill health. It can be violent. It can bring suicide. It can rupture and rend apart these ties. It can make it you can get to the point where the person who is seeking recovery has to separate themselves from the family system in order to find individuation. And that's where you sometimes see recovery communities. When I was first going to Narcotics Anonymous, which was my initial rescue fellowship, I remember I used to hear people, you'd say, like, my name is Jack, I'm an addict, and the community would say, hi, Jack, and then the Jack person would say, hi, family. Because what's happened is that the recovery community provides a surrogate pseudo-parenting function for these people. Oh. This place is a place of refuge for families that are deconstructing themselves and people that are losing their humanity. And the urgency is as high as I just spoke. Like, one of the tasks that I have is to make bereavement calls. And I'm sadly way too in tune compared to probably many of our team members with the fact that when I get a bereavement notice and I'm making the phone call, I'm going to find out it's overdose or suicide way more than it's like a peculiar manifestation of a COVID or something like that. So the risk factors for our patient community here are now tilted towards the actuarial issue that addictive disorders are deadly. And even if there isn't death, it's like the consequences are, I mean, in the classic alcoholic sense, wet brain, or, whatever, or even the shipwreck of a life into that, homeless, destitute, shantytown kind of grim scrabbling for food and shelter without it being able to focus on the most beautiful and meaningful things in existence. So I had one other place I wanted to go quickly, which was spirituality and mothering. And as I mentioned in my, somewhere in the lead-in or my announcements, was that I'm most trained in the Christian tradition. And one of the things that I have had to wrestle with in the Christian tradition was its strong emphasis, especially in the Protestant lane, on masculine language and a sort of a male framing of the divine. God is Father, and Jesus as the principal, masculine, and people just using him and male pronouns as the articulation of the spiritual reality that one encounters when one looks for it. But I grew up in the Catholic tradition, and I had an uncle, Uncle Jim, and he was a Marianist, which is a Catholic order of priests and brothers. And every time Uncle Jim would visit, he would give me pictures of statues from their home monastery, I'll call it, in Dayton, Ohio. And Marianists, as it might suggest, they're devoted to Mary, the mother of Jesus. And as the Eastern tradition said, the mother of God. And think about that for half a second. And we'll hear a Marian prayer later this morning. But I've ended up going to some degree back to my Catholic roots in my own prayer tradition and prayer life, because I find I need a feminine aspect to the divine. I really find, for me, it answers a bunch of questions that I get left with otherwise. And I'm enamored of indigenous tribal traditions that talk about Mother Earth. The Dan Brown Da Vinci Code, the movie that sort of wants to reclaim in the Christian tradition sort of the idea that embedded secretly in it is this secret, don't tell anybody, but God is not only male, but male and female, how could there not be a motherness of God? And last week was the Eastern tradition's Easter, and in the Eastern Rite, the Byzantine Greek and Russian Orthodox rites, part of what there's a word for Mary, she is Theotokos, which is mother of God. And they mean it, not mother of Jesus, but mother of God, right? And this is the child who comes to me when I preach about Christmas or whatever, and well, if Jesus is the Son of God and God is the Father of Jesus, who is God's parent, right? And this is where the Eastern tradition says, well, Mary is God's parent. And so, how about that for a Mother's Day celebration, right? Let's celebrate the maternal in our experience, which to me is like the most beautiful aspect of who we are as people, is this thing that we can do, which is to care for another more than we care for ourselves. That's the essence to me of the mother bone. And it's manifest all around us. We see this in people all around us. It's when I meet with a female patient here who has lost it, it makes me sad, but I think addiction can take that away from people. I think addiction can really rob people of their awareness and awakening to the calling that we have as biological beings to care for our young. So let's celebrate that is in even those of us who have lost the ability to hear its call. And let's celebrate that we are a place where the humanity gets to begin to be restored. And let's celebrate today that those people have given that in our lives. And let's remember, too, I had a whole other thing I was going to say, is there's a little bit of feminine in all of us. I think we're learning more and more about that. So I miss my mom so much, but all of us are called to that, to love one another and to love the other as much or more than we worry about ourselves. We will be happier, we will be a better society, and we will be more sober to the extent that we orient our lives in care and service. Thanks so much. God bless.